David Marr, what was more shocking to you, discovering your ancestors had been employed to kill Aboriginal people, or the apparently industrial scale on which that was occurring?
Well, the first shock, shocks can come like a blow, and that was like a blow. I found myself sitting there looking at a picture of my great-great-grandfather in the uniform of the native police. And my world hasn't been the same since that moment. It was a huge shock. But I knew within half an hour that I had to write a book about it because, I've been telling people for decades we have to face the past. And I fought in the history wars under the banner of Manning Clark. I thought I knew the fundamental story. I've read the books. I'm a huge admirer of Henry Reynolds and his cohort of historians. But it's much, much worse than I had thought.
What did you know about the native police before you started?
When I saw Reggie Ewer in this uniform, I thought for a wonderful moment that I might be mistaken about the native police. They might have been quite a nice outfit, I thought. And I went quickly to Wikipedia. No, they were not only exactly what I thought they were, but Reg Ewer's exploits were there in Wikipedia. And so were his brother Darcy's. They were notorious killers. People who have seen what I've written are shocked to discover about the native police. They'd maybe heard the name. But it is a discovery for people who are even well-read on the business of the Australian frontier. A band of killers that operated for 60 years and killed, well, all of their records have disappeared, presumed destroyed, but scholars working on the kinds of ratios of how many blacks died for every white are now talking about the possibility that this band killed 40,000 people, 40,000 Aboriginal people in its time.
Because you are tracing your family's particular connection, you do sort of cut a swathe, shall we say, through a particular history from, shall we say, the Murrumbidgee north, and it seems to get worse the further north it goes.
What I've written is a narrative history of the native police through the eyes of a family that backed it, directed it, and served in it. And in this way, by cutting a path, as you say, a swathe through that history, it's possible to see the landscape much more clearly than in some of the very, very fine historical studies. This is the narrative. This is the story. This takes this family from its days of land taking on a gigantic scale. 600,000 acres of land, politics, the economy, the way in which this system of killing was set up, and then its work. And you're right, the further it went north, really the worse it became. And the killings were notorious. This was an armed band of killers working for the Queensland government, which was quite happy to admit at the same time that there was no law to authorise them to do the killings they were doing. They didn't care about that a bit.
It's hard not to read the book in September 2023 and think about the resonances it has about the sort of racism we're seeing in the debate around the referendum now. Tell us a little bit about whether you were struck by some of those things and the sorts of things that were said at that time.
The arguments. I was under the delusion that the notion of sort of attacks on woke people were kind of invented, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, but they weren't. In the 1830s, there are newspapers, one of them belonging to that appalling windbag Wentworth, who attacked what he called the whalers for Aborigines, the people who were saying, don't shoot, don't steal, these are human beings. They were attacked for living in the cities, being elite, not knowing what they were talking about and showing off their humanitarian views. It's exactly the same. That same argument is still being used nearly 2 centuries later.
John Howard used to talk about the black armband view of history and say that we couldn't be held accountable or shouldn't feel guilty about what had happened back in the day. You say in your book that you've written it as an act of atonement. What do you feel about your connection with your family's history in this now?
I'm not guilty. I didn't lift up a rifle. I wasn't riding into a camp at dawn, but I am ashamed. In the same way that we can be really proud of what our family has done, generations ago, we can also be ashamed. But that kind of personal shame started to look almost trivial as my research and writing went on. The shame is national. And that notion of, sneering at people for writing the truth of what happened in this country is so John Howard. But there are still people around who think that the history of Australia is Cook, convicts, sheep, gold, Gallipoli. It's not. In between and behind all of that, this country was being conquered by Europeans. The true history of this country is a history of conquest. And we European Australians, now live with the conquered. And we have decent obligations to them, as we always have decent obligations to the enemy we defeat. That sense of decent obligation is being trashed in the referendum debate. Trashed. I've spent 4.5 years in this history, writing this story of what went on, and I look at the referendum debate and I think, these wars haven't finished. This is just another round. It's just going on. And how long does it go on for? Does it go on forever?
David Marr, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks, Laura.